You use the sharp end of the curette. Now, many people may or may not know that the curettes that you have, there's a sharp end, there's a little bit more of a dull end, so you can play with that with your pig's feet. And you always want to just do those sideways scraping movements. If you've never used a curette, you can go too deep too quickly, so you want to have that controlled depth when you do it. If you are going to do the technique that I'm talking about, which is you curette and then you burn it with the bifurcator, and then you do that 2 more times, only the initial curettage is sent in formalin. Anything that's charred is not going to be useful to the dermatopathologist. So only the initial curettage is sent in formalin. Okay, everything else you just discard. And then, again, you use the bifurcator if you have one, or a Bovie if you're in the OR, and you repeat that 2 more times. So it's a process. Again, you do 3 times in the same session, but only the initial curettage is sent in formalin to the lab. Okay, so that is a massive curette on a nose. If somebody came at my nose with that massive of curette, I think I'd cry, because we use such a tiny curette on the foot, and that's like, that could, scoop ice cream. So, right, you're like, thanks, doc, for that. It's a massive hole you just put in my nose. So that's just a simple curettage. And this is on a leg with Bowen's disease, so that's squamous cell carcinoma in situ, meaning it's superficial. So just scraping it, burning it, scraping it, burning it, scraping it, burning it. Again, because it's healing by secondary intention, you will have a scar. So again, it's not perfect, but it's something that for patients that cannot undergo a full procedure, it's something that we would utilize. This is on the face. This is the seborrheic keratosis, or again, what I lovingly call the over 40 spots. Some people call them, like barnacles of aging. I'm like, don't you even say that. Like, that is just like barnacles of aging. That's just cruel. That's just cruel. All right. So makes me sound like I'm a boat, with barnacles. An old boat with barnacles. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's bad enough you can't see close up anymore, and then you got barnacles on your skin. So you can just literally scrape and burn these too. So, and again, this is on the face, so you will have scarring. But again, some patients are like, I don't care, just get rid of it, doc. You always, you know your patient, so you know how some of them will respond. Okay, so this was my year-long project as a fellow, because when I was the first podiatric dermatology fellow in the U.S., and I had to prove my mettle. So I basically, he would give me all the procedures that nobody would want to do. Like somebody would come in with an armful of skin tags, like literally like stalagmites and stalactites in somebody's armpit, and I would be in there for an hour cutting them all out. He's like, all right, I'll let you do bigger things now. I'm like, thanks. Like, I can cut a bunion, but I have to start with skin tags. So he was like, all right, Trace, do this. So this guy wanted Elvis, all right? Now, he wanted jumpsuit Elvis, which is like sexy Las Vegas Elvis, right? Well, he was a little drunk when he got this tattoo, and he got bloated Elvis. And he wasn't happy with bloated Elvis. And he refused to have laser tattoo removal. So my job once a month for a year was to scrape and burn this tattoo as tattoo removal. So basically, that's a year's worth of my work. You can see, again, because the tattoo pigment can be very deep, especially depending on the tattoo parlor that you go to, or if it's homemade, or depth of pigment can be an issue, and color can be an issue. So you can still see some pigmentation at the end of my sojourn, but I like to say that he got the ghost of Elvis, and that Elvis left the building. All right. However, when I graduated, I had to reach out to my attending, and I was like, so how's that guy that I, worked on for a year and cut out his tattoo? And he's like, he got another tattoo on top of it. He finally got the Elvis jumpsuit of his dreams tattoo. And I'm like, yeah, but anyway. So it's not perfect, but if you ever have a patient who's like, I'm not paying for it, I just want the tattoo gone, it's an alternative. But it's a long process, and I had to numb that whole area, so it's not the most pleasant thing that you'll ever have done. Laser tattoo is very painful too, but getting that big of an area and anesthetized isn't fun either. All right, so if you've not played with the curettage, I encourage you to do that, especially on the pig's foot, so that you can feel the depth, again, the controlled depth that you need to have, the sharp and more the dull area of or sides of the curette itself. and kind of knowing what you can do. Now, where I use curettage the most is for underneath the nail when I'm doing a sampling of the nail for fungus. So, again, you're not going to draw blood there. You're going to be very gentle with it. And I use a metal, instead of the plastic disposable curette, I use the thin metal nail curette so that I have a small little area that I'm using underneath the nail. You can use this for in between the toes to do sampling for erythrasma or whatever rash they have in between their toes as well. So that is a utilization for curettage. You guys all good? You want to play with that a little bit, or like, I got this. Or as I joke to my patients, I'm like, I'll put my initials are TV. I'm like, I can put that in your foot after certain. I would never do that, but I can make that happen. All right, so while you're playing with that, let's talk about nail sampling. Now, I know when I was a student, I don't think anyone ever really formally taught me how to take a sample for nail fungus. I don't know about you. And even in residency, nobody really ever talked about it. So you just kind of go through it thinking, I'm just going to send nail plate and I should be good to go, right? Well, I found out the hard way when I went to my first investigators meeting for my first onychomycosis clinical trial that was not what is appropriate. Again, nobody ever taught me that. Turns out, and this makes sense when you think about it, onychomycosis is a disease of the nail bed. The actual disease state begins in the nail bed, and as the hyphae multiply and enlarge, they invade the lamina or the sheets of the nail plate. But the original disease state is in the nail bed. And you want to get a sample of the nail bed because that's the actual pathology. You can take a piece of the nail plate, but you don't want to send the stuff that's distal. If you think about it, the oldest part of the nail is the distal part of the nail plate, right? So if you have any hyphae or any genetics or anything of the organism at the distal end of the nail, it's dry, desiccated. It's not, if you do culture, it's not going to live on culture. It's going to be just sort of masked because it's not the good ooey gooey juicy stuff. So when I was doing a lot of clinical trials for onycho, I wasn't even allowed to send nail plate. I only could send subungual debris. So I had to scrape the nail bed and send as much, I would lovingly call it toe cheese, as possible. And if I sent any nail plate, I would get a nasty phone call from the fungus lab. So in your case, in your practice, what you can do is take that nail that you're going to sample and wipe it with alcohol so you can get off any surface contaminants, right? Then debride the distal tip of the nail. Discard that. Take your curette as much as you can, and depending on what lab you use, you might have a plastic baggie, you might have like a cardboard piece, what we call a dermapack. You might just have the empty formalin cups that have nothing in it. And what I have is I have the patient sit with their knees bent and their feet flat right here so that their nails are sticking out over the edge of the chair. And so I have my cup or my bag and I have my curette and I'm just putting the sample directly in there. And so I send all that subungual debris. If you want, you can send a piece of the proximal nail plate. So the proximal nail plate is going to be newer nail, and that will have not as dry, desiccated hyphae. So you can send that subungual debris because that's where the original pathology is, and then you can send a little proximal nail, and you'll get better results. Because I'm sure most of you, like me at the beginning of my career, you're like, it looks like fungus, it talks like fungus, it smells like fungus, it's probably fungus, right? The whole, like, if it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. Well, you probably got a lot of false negatives out there saying, oh, this isn't fungus. Well, maybe it wasn't, but maybe it was. But it really is dependent on how you do your sampling, and sampling is so, so important. So I recommend to you, again, wipe the nail with alcohol, debride that distal tip, discard that, and then take your curette, curette underneath the nail, and you can curette underneath the nail plate because there's onycholysis there. That's natural with these patients. Curette the nail bed gently, nothing to bleeding. And then again, you can send a little portion of proximal nail plate if you'd like to do that. And you'll start getting better results, because I certainly did with the clinical trials, and then that just spilled over to my normal practice. Okay, so 50%, and some people will say higher, but in the literature we say 50% of the nail disease we see is onychomycosis and 50% is something else. And the reality is that, again, I treat a lot of psoriasis in my practice. So nail psoriasis and onychomycosis are identical, virtually identical. I have to give a lecture to the derms on Saturday, virtually, on nail psoriasis and onychomycosis that can happen together. You can't tell them apart. I don't care how long you've been in practice. You can't tell them apart. They look identical. The only way to know is to sample it. So when you sample it, you're either going to get that you have onychomycosis, psoriasis, or sometimes, again, both. It's called secondary onychomycosis, where you have nail psoriasis and onychomycosis in the same nail. I know that's like crazy, but it's true. The other thing is that there's disease states like lichen planus that can affect the nail, and that can scar the nail permanently. And if you scar the nail permanently, there's no going back. And I've had so many patients be treated as having onychomycosis, and they had lichen planus of their nail, or lichen planus, however you want to say it. And it was too late for me to treat them. So it's important. And if you look at the package insert for terbinafine, oral terbinafine, it actually says that you should do a confirmatory diagnosis of onychomycosis prior to prescribing it. Because the cost of getting it wrong is huge. Now, worst case scenario, liver transplant, rarely ever happens. That's $10,000, right? Versus the cost of getting the diagnosis right, which is like less than $400, okay? So the cost of getting it wrong can be tremendous versus the cost of getting it right. So it's important that you want to do that. Okay, so there's because of the nature of doing sampling for fungus, there's no code for it. The only time you can code for biopsy nails if you're actually doing like a punch biopsy of the nail or some of the procedures I'm going to show you. So unfortunately, you don't get paid to do this specifically, but it's part of your plan. All right. Okay. So, hey now. There we go. So there's different tests you can order. There's, the old-fashioned KOH and culture, which is what the FDA makes us do even to this day, even though we fight it, because, that takes so long to come back. There's the PAS stain, which many of us use because it comes back fairly quickly. And the PAS is always good because it allows you to know, am I dealing with something that's maybe biomechanical or non-onychomycosis? Like I've done PASs where it comes back as probable psoriasis, or there's hyperkeratosis, or et cetera, clinically correlate, and you're like, oh, this is good because this is helping me. But PAS won't tell you the organism. Culture and PCR tell you the organism. PAS is just going to tell you that dermatophytes are there, okay? You can add the GMS stain. I don't do the Fontana Mason stain because to me, it's not as helpful as the PAS or the GMS, okay? So you can do whatever you feel comfortable with, but the PAS is the one that I utilize a lot. And there's also, again, PCR. So if you don't know what PCR is, it's where you're taking that sample that has the genetic material, you're amplifying it in the lab, and you're figuring out which organism it belongs to. So you'll get which dermatophytes are present in the nail unit. And there's different types of